Welcome to Lecture 8. In today's lesson, we are going to be looking at the topic on recycling and resource recovery. So we want to begin with firstly a brief look at a definition of recycling. So this entire concept should be familiar to most of you already. So this is not new. So when we talk about recycling, we are talking about the process of turning materials that would otherwise become waste into valuable resources. So remember, we have been talking about solid waste management all of this semester so far, and we know that one of the major issues that we deal with is what do we do with all this waste that has been produced, because we know that there are many environmental, economic, human health problems that can result as a result of waste. So recycling is one of the strategies we are going to be looking at in terms of how we deal with the solid waste management stream. So firstly, we want to look at what are the benefits of recycling. So recycling, we know, reduces the need for landfilling and incineration. If you recall, in one of the earlier lessons, we looked at what we call the solid waste management hierarchy, and we know that landfilling and incineration were among some of the least preferred solid waste management options for us, whereas recycling was among one of the preferred. And what we do is, with recycling, what we do is we manage to prevent pollution that is associated with the manufacturing of virgin products. Because remember, when we looked at our materials flow process, we know that at every stage of the processing of materials into products, we would produce some kind of waste. So we are looking to actually circumvent that system a little bit by, first of all, not going back to virgin or raw materials, using already processed materials that are now waste and putting it back into the materials flow cycle. So again, we are trying to cut that process short, and in the process prevent some pollution from taking place. And recycling also saves energy, since oftentimes we find that the processing of raw materials often requires greater use of energy than the processing of recyclable materials. Additionally, as mentioned before, the recycling will decrease pollution such as the emissions of greenhouse gases that we know contribute to our global warming. So the greater the use of recycling processes, we can actually contribute to the lowering of those greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming. Recycling also conserves natural resources, because as mentioned before, the recycling process makes use of waste material from other products. Therefore, we don't have to go back to the environment to extract resources from the environment for processing. Recycling also helps sustain the environment for future generations. So, I mean, we have been talking about some of the benefits, environmental benefits, particularly with regards to recycling. We know it reduces the need for an abundance of natural resources. It minimizes or helps reduce global warming and pollution, etc. So therefore, recycling becomes a critical aspect of sustainable development, because if you recall, sustainable development is critical for the survival of future generations. So we're not only trying to leave make sure we leave sufficient resources for them, but we also want to make sure we leave a reasonably clean environment for future generations. So recycling has a major part to play here. So when we look at the recycling process, from a community perspective, there are several options for us. So here I actually have a schematic that shows, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 collection options for us. The ones we would be familiar with would be curbside. So we know the curbside collection, so our recyclables could be collected once they've been sorted on the curbside. You have drop-off centers as well, where you can take your recyclables to locations and drop them off. For example, at the moment I know that Massey Stores has embarked on a pilot project where they're actually setting up bins specifically for the collection of recyclable plastics at some of their stores. Okay, so you can drop it off there. And we also have what we call buyback centers. Now we don't have many of these in Trinidad yet, but I know our government is currently embarking on developing and advancing the entire recycling process as part of our national solid waste management strategy. So we have buyback centers where in other parts of the world you can go to those centers and actually sell back your recyclables to them for a small cost. And then we also have deposit and refund programs. So I'll just go forward a little bit. So these different collection methods I've just talked about, the deposit and refund programs. This is a combination of a product charge, so that'll be a deposit. So for example, what would happen is when you purchase your product, there would be an additional small charge that would be included in the purchase price, that usually facilitates the producer or the vendor, in that when you bring back your recyclables, they can now afford the process of recycling and proper disposal. Okay, so that so you make that deposit, and then there's also a subsidy as well, which would be refunded to you when you return it. Okay, so we just go back, right? So these are the 4 collection options. When the recyclables are collected, we know they will go to a point or location where they are sorted and prepared. The sorted and cleaned materials will then be purchased by someone else as raw materials, where they will now remanufacture it into new products, and then of course it will be put back on the market and sold to the customers. So this is what the recycling process would look like. Okay, so we'll just move on. Right, so as mentioned before, we have that collection point where the recyclables would be sent to a materials recovery facility. We would have mentioned it before, and we will mention it further here again, a materials recovery facility, MRF, where the materials would be sorted, cleaned, etc., and it would be prepared into marketable commodities for manufacturing. So if it has to be prepared as raw materials for someone else, it has to be properly sorted, cleaned, and sometimes broken down into materials that can be delivered elsewhere. Right, so let's look at the manufacturing process. So once the materials have been cleaned and separated or sorted, the recyclables are ready to undergo the second part of the recycling process. Alright, so that would be the manufacturing process. Okay, some of the common recyclable household items, we're familiar with some of these. We know newspapers, paper towels, aluminum, plastics, glass, steel from our soda cans, and then they also have other types of plastics such as the heavier laundry detergent bottles, etc. So these are all examples of recyclable materials. And if you really consider a lot of these types of materials, remember, you really don't want them to go back into that landfill. So these are materials that these are some materials that can be best and easily recycled into other products. So the recyclable materials can also be used in very innovative ways. For example, there have been instances where you find they would actually use glass, recovered glass, to actually make roadways. road asphalt, so they call that glass felt. Or you may also see other examples where the recovered plastic has been used to make carpeting, um, artificial lawns, park benches, pedestrian bridges, etc. So these are all some, various types of interesting types of use of recyclable materials. If you refer to eClassroom, there would be a number of short videos available there for you to see how some of these products are being recycled into other things. Okay, so let's look briefly at purchasing the recycled products. So buying recycled, when governments attempt to buy recycled, or businesses or individuals, for each one of those stakeholders, they play an important role in making the recycling process work. Of course, the motivations for each might be different. Some of the motivations might be similar. For example, let's look at that question on this slide. How can governments encourage the purchase of recyclable products or recycled products? So remember, governments, first of all, they will have a national mandate to meet. That mandate would be first dictated by laws and legislation, and then of course whatever, let's say for example, whatever election campaign they may have run on, they have to deliver. So if, for example, a government priority has been, they have indicated that they want to be more serious about the environment, they have to take a leading role now at this point to do what is necessary to encourage the general population and the voters to buy into this environmental consciousness. So how can they do that? For example, they can make tax breaks and incentives available to businesses and manufacturers to encourage them to participate in recyclable business. For example, if they either produce or sell recycled products, they may get tax breaks or tax credits for that. Also, incentives would be another encouragement. For example, if they are involved in that type of business, they may get loans easier somewhere else. These are different examples. For the consumer would have to be encouraged in terms of maybe pricing. What does the price of the products look like? Is it easily available? These are things that the consumer would be concerned about. And of course, you're also looking at education of the general public to buy into the whole idea of recycling. Then we also want to look at the cost benefit analysis of recycling. So remember, there is a business concern here when we're talking about recycling. So usually decisions to recycle or not recycle, it would be based on cost and benefits decision, particularly from a business perspective. Let's look briefly at what this might look like. So when here, for example, let's look at a generalized concept of the cost benefit analysis. We have the stakeholders. So that's the first consideration we have to look at. Who are the individuals or the groups of people who would be affected by this, by your recycling, your whole idea to recycle? That might be your customers, your friends, your family, the wider society, etc. Then once you've identified your stakeholders, you want to look at the benefits versus the harms, or the harms would be the same as your costs. So for example, how can stakeholders benefit and how can they be harmed by my decision to recycle? And your final goal, you also have to consider, what is my ultimate goal? My ultimate goal is to create the most benefit over the harm. So we want the benefits to outweigh the harm for our stakeholders. So below here we have a more specific application of the whole concept of cost benefit analysis. On the cost side, with regards to recycling, we, for example, would want to look at issues like, what would my cost of recycling a particular product such as steel, what would the cost involve? Because the process of recycling will have a cost. What would the cost of collection? Because remember, to facilitate recycling, solid waste collection is a critical part of that. So there will be costs involved, and additionally there will be costs involved in the distribution of my my final product to other my final product, which would be a raw material for others. There will be a cost involved in that too, right? So there will be a lot of not only materials costs, there will be operational costs. Then we have to weigh this against other issues, against the benefits. So we look at reduced environmental impact. Now remember, with reduced environmental impact, there isn't you're not going to see an immediate significant impact there. That is going to be more long term, and this is one of the things that's often very difficult for the business sector to appreciate. It's important for them to see immediate returns and benefits. So this is where it gets tricky, and this is where the government and our leadership needs to take a significant role, because at this point they are the ones who have to look at the overall and long-term benefits for the community and the nation. Then we also have reduced energy use. We know that recycling helps reduce the amount of energy we consume. You will have positive sustainability, as we discussed earlier, in the sense that we'll have a reduced raw material and resource usage as well, not only energy use but natural resources. And then you will also have less waste and pollution going back out into the environment. So then, as we can see on this scale here, a scenario like this, we can make an argument then that the benefits for recycling of steel outweigh the costs involved. Right? So benefits to recycling are estimated from the following: the market value of the materials that you collected, so it will have a value even though it's recyclable material. The cost that you managed to avoid in other processes, other stages, because you have to collect it and dispose of it, whether you were looking at disposal in it through landfilling or incineration, there would be costs involved. So you're avoiding those costs. And then there are direct consumer benefits of recycling as well, because you would be able to for example, there may be buyback incentives, as we mentioned. You can sell your recyclables and get back a deposit, so it actually reduces the cost for you. Then you can purchase recycled materials which may be at a reduced cost, and you also benefiting in the long term in an intangible kind of way, in the sense that in the long term your environment is benefiting. So the costs can be estimated from, as we mentioned before, the cost of collection and sorting. So then you're going to also minus the value of the material from the end use market. So that's the cost of the material that you will sell to the market, right? So this is, so we're talking dollar costs here, right? So at this point I would like to ask you to please proceed to part 2 of today's lesson. Thank you.